Welcome to the Friendly Moms Club podcast with Jen and Karlee. We're the new mom friends you didn't know you needed.
We are creating a safe space to bring moms together, lighten the heaviness, and find joy in the everyday moments. Together, we will share our own experiences of being new moms while navigating the topics we wish more people talked about.
Join us every Monday to hear us skip the small talk and dive right into the uncomfortable. Good morning.
Good morning. Happy Mom Day.
Happy Mom Day.
We're always happy to be here.
Very happy today on Mom Day.
I'm especially happy though. I listened to some great pump up music on my way here, and music literally does make you feel better. It is a true art form. I really do think so, because it can make you feel things. And I just chose to listen to amazing music on the way here.
What did you listen to?
I was dancing. Anyone who saw me drive in was probably like, who is this
They're like,
girl?
She's having a good day.
She's having a great morning. And I was drinking my coffee, and it was just I feel so ready to go today. It was great.
What did you listen to?
I listened to a little hip hop. Little
hop.
Ja Rule.
Ja Rule.
A little Drake came in there.
What's
Who
love?
else listened to me? I don't know. Listen to me. You know what I mean. Anyways, so.
What's your favorite baby hip hop?
Well, I have to say, if you've never listened to Doggyland, it is 10 out of 10. It is.
Bow, wow, wow.
There's 2 volumes out there, volume 1 and volume 2. So if you don't know what it is, it's an actual kids album by Snoop Dogg. So it's good for kids. Jordan loves it, but it makes me happy every time I listen to it. The songs get stuck in my head. If you're lucky, Karlee is going to post a video of me singing to Henry trying to make him happy. And I was just singing the Doggyland songs. They're so catchy.
They're great.
And they actually talk about good life lessons too, about saying please and thank you, not being a bully, how to share, then typical things of ABCs, but they talk about real life issues.
Yeah, it's very inclusive, kind of contributing to the new woke generation we got coming up.
Yeah, and it is so good. So highly recommend. Listen to Snoop Dogg's Doggyland and download volume 1 and volume 2 because both have very good songs.
My favorite's Affirmations.
Oh yeah, and there's 2 different versions of that now. There's a new one, and it's all about these really good affirmations that kids should learn about how to be happy and love themselves. And it is
Yeah, and Snoop Dogg's not paying us to say this, but I mean, Snoop Dogg, if you're out there, if you want to.
Oh, that'd be a dream come true.
Yeah, sponsored by Snoop Dogg, the mom podcast, sponsored by a notorious pot smoker. But hey, we're inclusive.
Yeah, we are inclusive. No judgment. Judgment-free zone here.
Judgment-free zone.
So today we are going to be talking about childbirth.
Baby's coming out of you.
And this isn't a dinner time conversation, so maybe
Unless you're a labor and delivery nurse, and then I get in trouble for talking about these things at the dinner table. Yeah. So I've learned to have a filter at the table a little bit. You can ask my husband. He doesn't think I do.
Yeah. But it's going to be, we're talking about all the nitty gritty details here. And we're just going to talk about 10 things that maybe you didn't know or you didn't know to expect when it came to childbirth.
Yeah. And this one's going to be a little bit more on laboring, but in the future, we will be having videos on our own birth experiences. We're going to have one specifically on C-sections.
Yep.
Booked and emergency C-sections. We'll also talk about vaginal deliveries. But today is a little bit more about what happens in labor land because it's very unpredictable.
Very unpredictable.
Yeah.
We both had a little bit of unpredictable births. I don't know. So let's just get into it.
You'll have to tune back to hear about those.
Start. Yeah.
So what's number 1? Why don't you start?
It is water breaking. In movies, they make it seem like you are going to be walking in a grocery store and it's going to be a bottle of water is just burst and it's just going to be dripping down and it is this huge gush. But it's not the Hollywood gush, as Karlee named it.
I coined it
which I loved that.
I mean, it can be, but not always.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be. So, for example, without going into my whole birth story, it's kind of a funny story. I was sitting on my couch. I was 37 and a half, close to 38 weeks pregnant. And I'm sitting there huge. And I was waiting for someone to come and buy something off Marketplace. So I'm just sitting there waiting until I have to actually go downstairs and open the garage. And I was like, I think I just peed myself a little bit. And it wasn't a lot. It just felt like a little couple dribbles. And I was like, that's weird. No one told me you pee yourself in pregnancy. I didn't know that. Hadn't happened yet. In almost 38 weeks, hadn't peed myself. I'm like, oh, that's weird. I stand up and there's a little mark on I had a gray couch and it was a little dark
the couch
circle
on the
couch. No. I got a new couch, but there's a little dark circle. I was like, oh, I actually peed through the couch. That's embarrassing. So I told my husband and he's just like, oh, okay, you peed yourself. We're going to have to get we have a actual like steam cleaner because we have a dog that pukes and pees and all those fun things. So we
now
have
you
a steam
have a
cleaner.
child who pukes and
Yeah.
pees, so you're
he's
good.
like, okay, we're going to have to steam clean it. Yeah, fair enough. I go downstairs, sell the thing on Marketplace, and I see my mom, and then I look at her, and I was like, I just peed myself again. Like, Mom, this is weird. Am I supposed to pee myself? You know, mothers know everything. So I ask her, and she's like, I never peed myself. I was like, huh. And so at this point, I'm like, this is a little bit weird, but it wasn't a lot. So I called the nurse's line, which they were great. And they were just like, just come on in. They told me a few things to do so that it was a lot easier to test if my water actually broke, which was good. Mm-hmm. So I did that. I went in. And as we're standing there, like getting registered, and they're about to do the little like test, Nanad pipes in, my husband, and all of a sudden he's like, okay, well, so you know what I told Jen? He was talking to the nurse at this point. He's like, if her water breaks, I will clean the couch. But if she just peed herself, she is cleaning the couch. And the nurse just looked like she didn't know what to say. Anyways, long story short, he ended up having to clean the couch because my water broke.
Amazing.
And I was shocked. Like, I just thought I peed myself a little bit.
You weren't ready for it.
It was like a tablespoon of pee. It was not a lot. So it might be a lot, might be the Hollywood gush, or it might be a little tinkle like mine was.
Yeah.
So you just never know.
A lot of patients come in and the first thing they say is, so we're like, oh, what brought you in? They're like, I either peed myself or my water broke. Yeah. Like, it's like, that is probably one of the most common statements that people say when they come in. And it could just be some discharge. There's a lot of swampness going on in pregnancy. Yeah. It could be your water. So it's always best to get checked. And some of those things that I'm sure they told you when you were unsure if your water broke.
Yes.
If you can keep the underwear or whatever you were wearing, pad or undies that got soaked, put it in a bag, bring it in because we have little strips we can test it with.
Yep.
And then put on a pad. And wear that to the hospital. If you have those great like period undies, they're great for after, but not when your water broke because we want to actually see the color and consistency of it.
And it was so easy. Like they just took
a little swab.
That's a lot of information. They took my underwear and the pad and they just like tested like your water broke. It was so quick and easy. Like there was no nothing. Like I didn't even have to get undressed for them to say, oh no, your water broke. It was so great.
And then if it's not super clear, there's other ways they can find out. Yeah. They can actually do a speculum exam, which is like what you use for a pap smear, you know, the little duckbill.
Yeah.
And they put that in and they actually test fluid from around the cervix. So then we know, because you want to know if your water's broken.
Yeah.
And again, like you said in movies, there's the gush and then all of a sudden people are in labor.
Yes.
That brings us to number 2.
Yeah.
Labor is... can be, usually for your first baby, long and slow. And you're in early labor for a long time. So in the movies, people break their water and then all of a sudden they're driving to the hospital like, oh!
And baby's coming out in the backseat. Yeah.
Spoiler, that's not usually what happens. Second baby, third baby, fourth baby can be a lot faster. But first baby, typically, not always, I was a exception to that rule.
Yeah.
It's slow. So often you'll go to the hospital, they'll check your cervix, they'll ask you some questions about what's going on, do a check on baby, do a check on you. And if you're not in active labor, you will often get sent home unless there's something else going on. But be prepared that you may go in, you may get some medication for pain and then get sent home. There's a list of reasons why you would stay, which we won't get into today, but it's very common and people get shocked. They're like, but I'm having contractions. Like, how can I go home? But the best place to be when you're in early labor is at home, because when you're in the hospital, if you're planning a hospital birth, we like to muck around and everything, but we want you to be at home and calm and resting, because some people are in early labor for days and that's a long time.
Like hours. I know people that were in early labor for like 72 hours or something ridiculous like that. And it's not easy, right? Like there's a lot going on, but at least you're at the comfort of your home. Like you can be with your family in your own comfy pajamas and blankets. And I think almost all the moms we know had some lengthy labors.
Yeah, it's very common.
Not always long births, but long labors.
Because often I work 12-hour shifts. I'll leave and a patient will either be just coming in and I'll come back for my shift 12 hours later and they're still there laboring away. Yeah. So happens.
Well, I was waiting after my water broke. I saw, I don't know, maybe 10 moms come in and get sent home. Yeah. And I was just like, oh, those poor women. Like, I came in and I'm having baby today. And they all were just like, I'm in pain. You can't send me home. Like, I don't know how many times I heard that when I was just sitting in the hospital. So. Yeah.
And that brings us to number 3.
Labor is painful. And there's a time and place for the epidural and you can't just get it right away, which Karlee actually knows why. I just know you can't get it right away. But there's like a time period that you need to get the epidural. And sometimes you can be too early for it, and sometimes you can be too late.
Yeah, that was me. Missed my opportunity. Yeah, so what happens is people will have a contraction. They'll have a few, and they'll come in and they're like, I'm here for my epidural.
Yeah.
But you don't want it to get, if you're planning for an epidural, there's a sweet spot of when you want to get it, because you don't want to slow down your contractions. You want to actually be in well-established, regular, active labor. But people don't realize that early labor, like we said, can be long and painful. So they think, oh, I'm going to get an epidural, I'm not going to be in any pain. But there could be either your labor could go too fast and you don't have time for an epidural, or you could have a long early labor for days or even like 6 hours, and it's painful, but you don't get your epidural yet. So going into labor, it's good to be prepared of different tools to manage pain for if you're planning an epidural before your epidural. Also kind of having it in your toolbox, just knowing I may not get an epidural. Some hospitals, if it's a small hospital, you actually have to call in the anesthesiologist. They're the ones who actually administer the epidural. And if they're not on site at nighttime, sometimes it can be hard to get them in a timely manner. So you may have to wait longer than you would like. So even if your plan is for pain management with an epidural, it's important to have a plan in case you can't.
Yeah. And I know my sister, I was actually at the hospital, like in the room, and my sister was asking for one. And when she finally got it, she's like, oh, this doesn't, like, I thought I was going to feel nothing. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, I just thought I'd get an epidural and it would just like, the baby would come out and I wouldn't feel anything. And the nurse was like, no, you're still going to feel something. It's just going to be a lot less painful. Yeah. But my sister still said like it was painful. And I had a C-section, so I don't personally know the pain that it is. But she just was surprised that it didn't take away all the pain. So just be aware that it would help if you're going to get an epidural, but it's not going to make things like magically all better. And you're going to be just like, oh, this is great. Baby's just sliding on out now.
Wouldn't that be nice? And sometimes epidurals don't work, and they either have to like adjust it or put in a new one. Or sometimes if your baby's in a funny position, you'll have a lot of back pain and pressure that doesn't get taken away with the epidural. So
yeah, we know one mom, and she said the epidural did absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
All her pain was in her back, and she said it was so painful. And just nothing helped. That people have tried the laughing gas. Some people said it made a little bit of a difference. Some people say it makes absolutely no difference. I don't even think they do it at all hospitals. Like
I think it's pretty standard now. They took it away during COVID, but it should be back everywhere. I was so excited for the laughing gas when I was pregnant. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna have a great time. Patients often get like quite euphoric and giggly. I was stoked, and I hated it, and I was mad. I was
don't need any laughing gas to be happy and giggly. You're just naturally like that. But
So then into the next one. With pain comes noises sometimes. So number 4 is that labor is very primal, and some people are silent laborers. Some people are very loud, and that's okay. I actually had a friend message me and say, I really want to try to have my 3rd baby without any pain management. And I'm like worried that I'm going to be noisy. And I was like, dude, we do not care. Like, you can always pick out the room of the patient who is either about to get their epidural or waiting for an epidural or planning to go without, because often they're noisy. Sometimes people are just like silent, and that's how they manage pain. Some of us, I was very loud, and that's okay. And it's normal. And the noises that come out of you, they're not noises that you're used to making. Your body, like, it's so primal. I don't know. It felt good. I can post a video of me in labor, and I was just like, oh, and it helped. The low groans. I was primal AF.
I mean, I heard a few of those when I was in the hospital. I heard someone actually giving birth, and I heard lots of noises. But again, C-section, I don't have a personal experience for this, but you do you. Who cares what anyone thinks? Like, you are having a baby.
Nobody cares.
This is not the time to be worried about what you sound like or what you look like. Like, make whatever face. Like, you need to like grunt and scrunt. Like, who cares? Squeeze your spouse's hand. Like, it does not matter. You do what you need to do. Exactly. You get in that zone and you focus on whatever it is you need to do.
And sometimes people even get into a zone where the support person or partner will be trying to talk to them, and I'm like, they're not there. Like, they are in the zone, and that's okay. And sometimes between contractions, they'll like put a hand out for water or like a cloth, but it's very common for the patient to be like in the zone. So that's something you can also talk to your support person or partner about, that how you're going to communicate in labor, because you may not want to be touched. You may not want to talk. You may not want them to talk to you. So these are things to talk about with them. So when you're laboring, you're not like, shut up, and then they get all upset. Like, we don't need that.
You might say things that...
Yeah. I actually had a coworker.
It might come out a little harsh
Yes.
maybe during the time, but it's all done in love.
Yeah. I had a coworker say to me, please don't judge me on how I treat my husband when I'm in labor. I'm like, I don't think you can judge anybody when they're in labor.
Oh, but we did have, so we just went to a class about baby infant feeding. And the lady there, Samantha, who owns Belly's Community and Belly's Inc., we're actually going to have her as a guest, which we are very excited about. So stay tuned for that. But she was talking about wanting to have a home birth and that it is noisy, kind of how we're talking about. So she actually prepped her family. She said, like, listen to some of the noises that happen in birth so that when they happen, you're not scared, because she was going to have 2 other kids at home and she didn't want them to be scared about what was happening, like what the noises that were coming up. So she actually got them, like her spouse and the kids, to listen to what birth can sound like. And she said it helped a lot. Like her son was actually like, oh, good noises, Mom. Like, that's normal. And so it's good to like, maybe your spouse needs to know that it is noisy, and show them an example so that when you are screaming or grunting or growling at them, they are like, oh, this is normal, right?
This
like,
is good.
Just prepare everyone.
Yeah. Pain is part of the process.
And you need to prepare everyone, because everyone is going to see your vagina. Literally everyone. There's going to be nurses and doctors and anesthesiologists, spouses, like just a lot of people are going to see it. And you have to be comfortable with that. Like, you have to try not to worry about it.
We're not looking at your vagina. We're not like, it's just a body part to us. We're healthcare professionals. It's not.
It is their literal job, and they're going to be down there, and it is going to be, like you already used the word, swampy. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? So there's a lot of stuff going on down there, and they're constantly going to need to be there. And then a baby's going to come out of there. And even if you're not having a vaginal birth, they're still going to be down there. Like, it's still a thing.
In
like
a C-section, they put in
breaking, like whatever's going to be happening, putting a catheter in a C-section, even just like cutting you open, like they're still down there. Like, they may not be in your vagina, but they're in the same vicinity. So you have to just try to let go of that self-consciousness you might feel going to the hospital or beforehand. And this whole idea of like, do I need to clean and like tidy down there before I go and have a baby?
Your haircut does not matter.
So try to just let that go. I know that is easier said than done. And as someone who has endometriosis and other vaginal problems, like, I'm very used to it, because I've seen, I don't know how many doctors and specialists and how many cameras shoved up my hoo-ha that I'm just like, oh yeah, anyone want to see? Cool, like welcome in. And I know that's not the same for everyone, but just try to embrace it. It's a beautiful thing that's happening. Who cares if you shaved or not? Who cares what it looks like? Like, these are professionals and they don't care. Spoken from an actual labor and delivery nurse. Doesn't matter.
It's all part of the process. And also, your healthcare professional should be, I hate to use the word should, but they should be discreet. They're not going to come in and whip the blanket off and be like, all right, open up. Like, the same as when you get a massage. Like, they're very careful with the blankets. But in order for us to see where the exit of the baby could be, there needs to be some part exposed. And if you do feel uncomfortable with either like the number of people in the room, or say, for example, you're in the stirrups and they're done with the test and they still haven't covered you back up, then maybe your support person or yourself, you can ask, can I have a blanket? Like, you don't need to be exposed when you don't need to be. But for the test, when we're doing the vaginal exams, if they're doing a speculum exam, or when the baby's actually coming out, like you need a full view of the field. But if you do feel uncomfortable, then talk to your nurse about it, and they can hopefully make you feel more comfortable.
I've also heard that sometimes they offer you like a mirror, or you could bring one if you want to see. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to see, but maybe you are just going to want to see, like, hey, I want to see what everyone else is. What does it look like when the head is starting to I don't know.
It can be very motivating if you're pushing. Like, if you get to the stage where you're fully dilated and pushing, it can be very motivating when you can see that. So if you have an epidural, often you can't feel kind of where you're pushing. So if there's a mirror and you can see the movement of the head, or you can start to see baby's hair, then it can be helpful to know where you're pushing. I always offer it to every patient, and I would say 90% of people are like, no way. And
horrified by the idea.
But then some people are like, yeah, like they're into it. And some people, it's like specifically in their birth plan, like, I want a mirror. And so if you want a mirror, you ask for one. Yeah. If you don't want a mirror, you just say, no. No.
Yeah. I don't need to see down there.
No. And sorry, you go.
Oh, no, I'm just saying it kind of brings us into the next one, because there's a lot going on down there.
Birth is very messy. So from the second, if your water breaks before labor, or during labor, you will continue leaking until baby comes. Because essentially your amniotic sac, where baby lives, is a balloon. And if there's a little break in that balloon, then the water starts coming out. And there's a lot of water in there. So even if you do have a big gush, you'll still continue to leak. And patients always get really uncomfortable when I'm like, hey, like, let's go here, go for a walk. And they're like, oh, my water's broken. If you drip that thing all over the floor, it does not matter. There is a reason I wear gardening shoes to work, because I am used to getting foot showers, and that's okay. And then when you're actually laboring, or even in early labor, there's show, which is like blood and mucus coming from your cervix, and that's completely normal. That's actually a good thing. We like it when show, to some patients it means you're progressing in labor, and it's something you're not used to. Because it's not a period, and it's not like normal cervical mucus. Like you just got a lot going on down there, and that's okay. And then it's bloody as well sometimes. My husband, when he looked at some of our birth photos, he was like, oh my goodness, you bled so much. And looking at them, I was like, oh, that's normal, like within the normal limits of what you can bleed. It just looks like a lot, because it looks like a whole bunch of blood is coming out of you, and it's normal. And it's not scary, and it doesn't mean anything is wrong. You can bleed too much, which is something else that maybe we'll talk about one day. And then also, baby can poop inside of you. And that means it can change the color of your fluid when your water's coming out. Or baby, sometimes like the exit poop they like to do right when they come out, they like to just leave a big trail of meconium, which is their first poop. Oh. And it's like kind of all over like all over yourself, and then all over where baby came out. And it's very common, and it's just messy. And people who are working in that environment, like, it's normal to us. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's all natural. It's part of your body. But I can see, like, it is uncomfortable. I remember even when my own water broke, I was like, oh, like I made a mess. But like, that's fine. That is okay.
Yeah. I remember when, for my C-section, when Jordan came out, she actually peed on me. Like, so as soon as she was coming out of the incision they made, they're like, oh, she's peeing. And I was like, she just can pee inside me? Like, that is weird.
That's actually where amniotic fluid comes from. It's their pee.
So that makes sense.
Yeah. They swallow the water and then they pee it out. And that's how they maintain the fluid. But their pee is sterile because there's no bacteria. So it's not like, there's no scent to it. There's no like, it's sterile pee.
I guess I just didn't expect them to.
Yeah, I know.
She's peeing in you. My husband was like, what? She's peeing? Yeah. And we were just, it was just a little weird.
And you're shocked. You're like, but it's an open wound. You're peeing in me. But it's okay. Their pee is fine.
It's just, another one of the glorious, messy things about birth.
And then you just keep getting peed on over and over again.
And
Lots of that.
You're talking about the dirtiness and the fact that baby can...
Well, it's not dirty. It's messy.
Oh, sorry. Messy. I shouldn't say dirty. Yeah. That is a negative word for it. Yeah. We don't want it to be negative because it is dirty. A beautiful thing.
Yeah. Just messy.
Yes. But poop.
Let's talk about poop.
So that's one of the messiness that can happen.
Yeah. And it's normal.
And it's not always your baby's poop we're talking about.
Sometimes you poop. Yes. I pooped. Yeah. I remember when I was, first I'll say, as a labor and delivery nurse, it's okay if you poop. And we actually like it because it means you're pushing. And a little bit of poop comes out, we just wipe it away. And we usually have just like a stack of wet wipes, and we just wipe, and like, it's just part of the process, and that's okay. And I know this. And for some reason, when I was in labor, I was convinced I was not just like having like a little nugget come out. I was convinced I was having this massive poo. Turns out that poo was my baby, because it was not. And I ended up having an OB deliver my baby, even though I had a midwife. And I also delivered at my work with all my coworkers, which isn't weird. Except for some reason I was concerned about pooping. So I'm up in the stirrups and I'm screaming, I'm pooping! Like, I was so concerned that I was pooping. And I remember the doctor just looked at me and she's like, no, you're not. And I was like, oh, okay. And then my husband, Jeff, told me later, you did poop a little bit, but they just wiped it up and went on with it. And then it's just part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We all poop. We all poop it anyways.
It's just
you're not used to pooping in front of people with your legs spread while people are staring at it come out of you. I get it.
Do people poop like a lot or a little? Like, it can be a complete range of amount of poop?
It's usually like usually when you're going into labor, your body kind of clears house. So you'll often either get diarrhea and that can be a sign you're going into labor, or even in early labor. A lot of people say they do poop a lot. Most commonly, it's just like little like bits that come out when they're pushing. Once in a while, people will have like a full poop either before they push or when they start pushing, just like their body's clearing house and that's the time. That's not as common. And even if that does happen, and like we spray in the room, we tie off the garbage, like it's fine. it doesn't happen as often. Most of the time it's just little bits or like we just wipe to keep you clean. So if and if you don't want to know, you can tell your nurse, like, don't tell me if I poop, because sometimes we'll tell you like, yeah, good, you're pushing in the right spot. But if you don't want to know, we just wipe, we move on. And we're not ignoring it, where we're like, we kind of just pretend like it doesn't happen because it doesn't matter. We don't need to talk about it. So if you see us kind of just wiping and moving on with it, like, that's okay too.
Yeah. Okay. So that's poop. It's cool.
I love poop.
Again, you do you.
Yeah.
It might feel good to just like let it all out, right? Like you don't want to be, when you have a good poop when you really need it, or if after you've been maybe constipated and it finally comes out, it's like, I don't know. I wonder if there's any bit of like
relief. Well, I thought, like I said, I was pooping, and it turned out it was the baby. And having a baby, especially without an epidural, just feels like you're having a really big poop. And it was like the best feeling. And then first when he came out, I still had some like crampiness, and my coworker looked at me and she said, just wait till that placenta comes out. It's the best feeling. And then all of a sudden I just felt like a come out of me. And it was like, it was like the biggest poop. And I was just like
a good poop relief on steroids.
Oh, it was so good. It was like I was waiting 9 months for that. Like you don't realize how like full and heavy you feel when you're pregnant. And then once that placenta came out, it was like every contraction that I had was just gone. And it was wonderful.
Nice.
I'll always remember that feeling. And the birth of my child, that too. But the feeling of that placenta coming out, that was good.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And the next one. An emergency C-section can happen at any time. It can be planned. Well, so you can plan to have a C-section. That's not an emergency C-section. But even if you have a planned C-section, like I did, I ended up still having an emergency C-section. So even though it was planned, my water broke. And so it happened a few days earlier. And that was considered an emergency C-section, even though it was in the plan, which was kind of weird to me, just the terminology of it. But you might have one before labor. So before things even get going, like you might need to have an emergency C-section. You might have one during labor. So a lot can happen during labor that might lead you to have to get an emergency C-section, even while you're pushing. So you could have pushed for hours. And we know some moms that did this, like just pushed and pushed, like baby coming out like a yo-yo, just coming in and out and not able to get past. And then they're like, okay, emergency C-section. And they have to go after you've been pushing for hours. And your poor body and vagina is just gone through the ringer and it just didn't work. So there's lots of times that it can happen for different reasons, like several different reasons. But it's okay. Like they do this a lot. Like C-sections actually are fairly normal.
Yeah, very, very common. Yeah.
Very common.
Yeah. I don't know what the stats are. Well, they're different in every hospital. Some hospitals have way higher C-section rates for like not good reasons. Some hospitals have lower rates, but I think it's around like officially like 30% or 40%. But
like it's quite high. I mean, I had a C-section and I had a very good experience with it. Okay, I had an emergency C-section, but I would have had a planned one anyways. And I know lots of people, and the recovery was actually pretty good. I think it's just a scarier word. And I think some people maybe aren't prepared for it, but it can happen. It is common. It happens to lots of women. And it unfortunately even happens after you're pushing. But you need to do whatever's going to be done to be the safest for you and your baby.
Yeah. And people are often shocked when they're in labor and they're like, what do you mean I need a C-section? Like I'm in labor. Or they get to fully dilated. And like you said, they're pushing and then they still need a C-section. And people are often very shocked. It's like they're like, okay, I'm pushing. Like I'm safe. It's fine. Yes. But it can happen at any point. And just knowing that, not like keeping it there, like, oh, this could happen at any point, but just knowing that it can be part of the plan at any time in your labor is nice to know in case that does happen to you.
Yeah. It wasn't scary to me because I had it planned, so I had a long time to prepare for it. So the emergency C-section didn't worry me the same, but I could see if you were just like, oh, I'm just going to naturally do, like my mom was natural, my sister had natural baby, like, a lot of people get it in their head, but just try not to worry too much. You just have to let things happen as they're going to progress and do whatever's safest for you and your baby.
For sure.
And at the end of the day, that's what you want, right? Like you and your baby want to be good and healthy. And
there's lots of stigma and shame around having a C-section. Like it doesn't make you any less of a mom or a parent.
Yes.
And it doesn't well, you had a C-section, so maybe you can talk about that, but like you still went through birth.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if they're coming out the old fashioned way or coming out the sunroof.
Yeah.
Like you're still having a baby, and it's the only surgery that you have like a major abdominal surgery. And then all of a sudden they're like, here's another person to take care of instead of you being taken care of. Like it's the only time that happens. So I always say that C-section moms are the superheroes of the surgical world. And
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, because you're just expected to care for this other human. And my other thing about calling a vaginal delivery a natural delivery, I like to say that all deliveries are natural. And you either have a vaginal delivery or you have a C-section. Same thing as calling an unmedicated birth a natural delivery. Well, it's all natural. Like birth happens.
Yep.
And sure, there's like the old fashioned way, but that doesn't make it any more natural. And I think that changing that language can kind of take away some of that stigma and shame that C-section moms feel.
That.
So like there's an unmedicated birth. So if you have a baby without any medication, it doesn't make it natural. It's unmedicated. And then if you have a baby that comes out down below, it's a vaginal delivery. And then otherwise it's C-section. Yeah. Because I think it's very common to call a vaginal birth a natural birth. But why can't a C-section be natural?
I mean, it feels pretty. I still had that same like whoosh.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't the same. Clearly it wasn't the same. It's coming out of a different area, but you still feel that like that pressure release. I guess.
Yeah.
And like C-sections are a bit wild, and I'm excited to talk about it one day because it's like not anything like I expected. And my husband was like, I think a little bit horrified at first, and then he was like, oh, like it's interesting, and he even thought it was interesting.
And it's birth.
But it's not the easy way out. And I guess that's a stigma that people use a lot of times too. Like, oh, you're just getting a C-section. Like that's way easier, right? But there's just different. So I like the way you put that about natural. Birth is natural. Like you are still giving birth to a baby. However, that needs to happen. Again, no judgment, no shame. Like you do what you have to do.
Yeah. I think it's because people are uncomfortable about saying the word vaginal or vagina.
No.
So they're like, it's a natural birth. I remember one time the billing department at my work called me about a patient. They're like, did they have a natural birth or a C-section? And I was like, well, they had a vaginal birth. I was like, playing dumb, like, I don't know what that means. So I'm like, they had a vaginal delivery. So I was like, take that. And then they're like, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm like, sorry, make you say the word vagina. Like,
okay.
Part of it. So speaking of emergency C-sections, number 10, our final point is that birth doesn't always go according to plan.
And almost only at number 9.
Oh my goodness, counting is so hard.
When you have a baby, sometimes simple things like this is really hard. So
our second to last point, number 9, which I can actually see there's a 9 right in front of this point. It's hard.
Okay. We've had long days. It's okay.
Mom, it's like 11 a.m.
I know.
Mom life. So number 9, things don't always go according to plan. And that's kind of like what you can expect out of birth is that things will not always go to plan.
Yes. And I have like a prime example of this. So my sister, this was almost 5 years ago. She went into labor. We were at the hospital. This was pre-COVID. So like my mom and I were there and we were all hanging out. And she had this great nurse. I'll still remember she had the same name as my mom. So I will never forget this nurse.
Aw,
she was
cute.
fabulous. And so she was talking. She's like, oh man, my shift's going to be over at midnight. I'm going to miss it. Like you're not very dilated. Like you're definitely not going to be having birth anytime soon. Like that sucks. I'll come and check on you tomorrow. And I'm going to clock out soon. And so we were saying goodbye to her. And then it was less than like half an hour later that they came in to check on my sister. And she was, having contractions and she got the epidural and was complaining it wasn't doing anything. And so she was, in labor, but just every nurse was like, no, you still have a long ways to go. And then all of a sudden the nurse was like, you are like, it's time, you need to push. But they hadn't set anything up in the room. So the stirrups weren't up, like nothing was scheduled. So they looked over. And so it was me and my mom and my sister's husband there. And they're like, you grab one leg, you grab another leg. And they're directing us.
Yeah, put to work.
Because they needed stirrup. Like they needed that same, I guess, movement and position, and they didn't have time to put the stirrups in. So my mom and I,
you don't need to deliver with stirrups. Some doctors say they like need the stirrups for like convenience. Well, it is convenience, like for, I don't know, they probably say for safety, but you don't need to. You don't need any stirrups, but some doctors do want one.
Well, we
do
have given a choice. We were just told grab.
You do have to have your legs kind of back because you need to be able to access the exit.
Yeah, we weren't given any choice. Yeah. And so we were not actually going to be there for the birth. Like,
really?
We were just there hanging out beforehand. So I mean, I got a front row seat to my niece's
fun.
birth, and I saw it all. All the nitty gritty, all the messy.
It's exciting.
I saw the fluids. I saw, and it's like a car crash. Not that it's a negative thing, but you just can't look away. It's that same thing of like when you drive by, everyone looks at a car crash. As much as I didn't want to stare at my sister giving birth, like I felt like, oh, do I need to like give her privacy?
Yeah.
Because she wasn't expecting us to be there. I couldn't look away. And so I just watched the whole thing, and it is incredible. But it was nothing. Like none of that was my sister's plan. But it worked. Like it was really cool in the end.
I'm glad you got to see it.
Like I took so many photos, like
Yeah.
photos no one else is ever going to see. But they're really cool, like keepsakes for my sister to look back and actually see what was happening.
Especially if it happened so fast, your brain kind of blocks it out. So to see those videos and pictures, it's cool because you're like, oh, you get to relive your birthing experience.
Yeah, which I would tell everyone. Like if you have a spouse with you, if you just have like a birthing partner or a support person, doula, midwives, like I've heard sometimes they'll help you out and take some photos or video even, depending on where you're at. Sometimes they ask you not to take video. But I know that it's messy and that it's painful and that maybe you're not thinking about it in the moment. So maybe this is something you want to talk about beforehand, but take the pictures and videos. You can delete them. If you end up being like, that was traumatic, I don't want to see it, you can delete them and that's totally fine. But you might want to look at them. Like I love looking back at them, and I know my sister likes looking back at hers, and it's really cool to see. So you might not have thought like, I want to see giving birth, but it's pretty cool. So I would recommend taking the photos, and then if you want, like just delete them. If you're like, I can't look at this, I never want to see it, cool, delete them, no harm, no foul, like all good. But I think that you will want to see them. So it might be worth having that conversation beforehand.
Definitely. That's a good thing to put on your plan that can go to plan.
Yes.
Taking photos. Or maybe things go too fast and you don't get a chance.
I know.
But it is possible.
It never goes according to plan. Oh, there's always something that sneaks in that you're like, oh, that wasn't what I planned. But I mean, you can try your best and
see what happens.
Yeah.
And then
Okay, now we're at number 10.
Number 10, the real number 10.
Now we're actually at number 10. So this is the last one.
Yeah, the final. So sometimes when baby comes out, they do need a little bit of help after delivery. Sometimes just for a few minutes, sometimes a little bit more help. We call it as nurses like resuscitation or recess, but it doesn't mean that they're not alive. It just means they need a little bit of help with breathing. So when babies first come out, they haven't used their lungs inside. So they have to transition to the outside world. To using their lungs. So sometimes they come out either like a little lazy. You may hear people call them like floppy, and sometimes they don't pink up right away. So they stay a little bit, they come out looking a little blue, and it looks horrifying. The first time you see that, you're like, oh my goodness. And of course your brain goes there that you think something's happened to your baby. Sometimes they just need a little love. So what will happen is they'll often bring baby out and put them right on your chest, give them a little bit of a rub. And if baby's not perking up kind of how they like, then they'll take them to the other side of the room to where the baby warmer is. Your support person, your spouse, whoever's there with you can go over to that and stay with baby. And sometimes you're only separated for a few minutes and then they bring baby back. Sometimes from there, baby then has to go to NICU. It's very rare, but I like people to know about that because I've heard of friends who that's happened to, and then often people come rushing in the room because when baby comes out like that, you don't know, are they going to perk up right away or do they need more support? So then you always, as a healthcare person, you call for extra help. So then lots of people come in, and it's very scary, especially if you don't know that could happen. And most of the time, baby's fine. They just get sometimes maybe a little bit of suction or a little oxygen, and then they go back to mom. Or sometimes they do need more help. Like in your case, baby went to NICU right away.
Yeah, I saw her for maybe like 20 seconds. Like they took her right away. Like she peed on me, went to the warmer, did the tests. We're like, nope, she's not breathing properly. She needs to go to the NICU. They basically handed her on the way to the NICU. They were like, oh, here, mom, here's your baby, and left. And they didn't really explain anything. And my husband was just like, he didn't know where to go. So he's like looking between me and the baby. They're like, no, like you, husband, go with the baby. So then he ran off with the baby. And later he told me he felt really bad leaving me. But obviously, like, you want someone to be with the baby. That's what I would have wanted. So that could also be something that you talk about with your spouse beforehand. Because if that happens, like, to make sure your spouse knows it's okay if you go with the baby. Like, that's what I would prefer. I mean, it was weird and scary, and I'm strapped to a bed, and we'll go through our birth stories another time. It's an interesting experience, but I think just being prepared that it could happen. And then my baby was in NICU for 5 or 6 hours, and then she came back and everything was totally fine. It was more of a precaution than anything, but just knowing that it could happen and having the wherewithal to be like, okay, that was scary, but I'm going to ask a question. Can you please tell me what's going on? Because nurses are also like, they're doing their job. They're doing things. Then they had to make sure the placenta was out of me and they're sewing me up. And so they were focused on that they weren't focused on explaining to me where my baby was going. But I think I easily could have asked and they would have answered. But I was just like, almost scared to ask
You're kind of like
questions.
a bystander in your own birth. Not what we want to happen.
Yeah. So just, you can ask like, okay, so my baby's going to NICU. Can you explain why? Or, just ask those questions. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a terrible thing. Like they could go for not terrible reasons and just kind of precautionary, like in mine. And I know.
And it's nice sometimes if you just say like, can I get an update? Like usually it's the doctor that's supposed to come over and give you the update. But sometimes like a nurse or somebody else will just come say, hey, just so you know, your baby's breathing. Yeah. There's a heartbeat. It's just, they need a little, like what we call CPAP, what often like old chubby men will have in their bed.
Or my husband.
And all it does is it just puts pressure into the lungs, so their little lungs don't deflate when they're.
Sorry, the world knows you're a chubby old man with your CPAP.
Except he's not at all. Sometimes that's just what they need, so they're just getting a little bit of help to make breathing easier.
Yeah.
And it's
until they figure it all out.
Until they figure it out. And then they're good. And sometimes babies go to NICU later. So my guy, Henry, he actually went to NICU the second day. So he was born at 11 p.m. And then the next day around noon or 1, he ended up going to NICU for low blood sugar. So it can happen at any point. And he was fine. He just had to go down. He had a few low blood sugars and he had a very eventful birth. So he had a lot of risk factors for that. So they sent him down and he actually didn't have a low blood sugar after he went down to NICU, but had to spend 2 nights there. But
it's good to know that it can happen at any time too, and that's okay. Like, like Henry in your example, like it happened and it was okay. It wasn't anything.
Yeah. I mean, it was still sad and scary. And
scary.
Not what we had on our plan. We didn't plan to be separated.
Yes.
But we made the best of it and had some good tears. And then, got to go visit him and I got to have a couple really good sleeps. Like I still went down at night to do feeding, but I got to have a couple good chunks. And I was like, that is my silver lining of this, that I got a little bit of rest.
It's always good to take a look at the little positives that you can find for things. So that's good that you're able to do that and look at that little bit of a positive.
Yeah.
So those were our 10 things, guys. We are not guys. It's a terrible habit that I have of saying that, but
peeps.
Our peeps.
Pups.
That was it.
Pups.
Our pups.
Pups
Like Doggyland. What's up, my pups? That's what he always says. Oh, Snoop Dogg, love you. We hope that you actually learned something, and maybe there was something in there that you hadn't thought about or that you didn't really know too much about, and we hope that it was educational. You actually kind of
learned a little.
Had something that you could take away and store, or it gave you an idea of something you and your spouse should talk about before you give birth.
Yeah. And I know we say this a lot, like, oh, this will be a future episode. But going forward, we do want to make some episodes that are a little bit more educational about childbirth and what to expect in different stages, what to expect in a vaginal delivery, when you get an epidural, in a C-section, booked or unplanned. Yep. So that's coming up in the future.
Yeah.
And then I would just say to kind of recap this, my number one tip as a labor and delivery nurse is to have a loose plan. So I like to say like birth preferences are a lot more likely to kind of go your way than like a very regimented birth plan. Yep. It is totally fine to have a lot of preferences about who's in the room, if people can talk or not talk, if you want music or no music, like that is all cool. But I find every time a patient comes in and they say, I don't want a C-section and I don't want forceps, it's like, well, now you're going to need one. Yeah. So,
And when you give yourself those expectations, you're kind of let down more if they don't happen. Yep. So sometimes if you set too many like high expectations, but this is going to be great, I'm not going to be in pain, I'm going to deliver without medication, unmedicated vaginally. And then if none of that happens, you're let down a lot more than if you go in being like, I'm going to do what my body has to do.
Yeah. To get baby and myself safe.
Your mind isn't in charge of what's happening, right?
The Mom Day mantra for today is that your body and your baby are the boss of birth.
Yeah.
And that's something I actually say to patients quite often because you're not like, sure, you have control over choices, but over the whole experience, your body and your baby, they're the boss. They're going to call the shots. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's childbirth.
That is childbirth. 10 things that you maybe didn't know about. So thanks for listening. We hope that you guys, learned something again.
Yeah.
Always happy to have you here. And we can't wait to see you and chat with you next Monday.
Yeah. And if you like being our mom friends, then subscribe to our podcast or like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can hear more from us.
Yes.
All right. Thanks
All
for
right.
joining. Bye.
Okay, happy Mom Day. See
See you
ya.
next week.